For every Fannie Mae Clackham, there were hundreds, even thousands of women who disappeared into silence, who took the letter, packed their things, left the building for the last time, and found another way to survive, who moved to different cities, took different names, and rebuilt in smaller, quieter ways, who never spoke about what happened to their families, friends, or anyone else. Speaking would have required explaining, and explaining would have required confirming, and confirming would have cost them whatever remained. Some of them lost more than jobs. Security clearances revoked became essentially permanent marks on their records. The federal government shared files with defense contractors, state governments, and sometimes foreign allies. A woman fired from the State Department in 1952 might find herself unable to work in any government-adjacent field for the rest of her career. The mark followed her throughout her professional life. Some of them lost their families as relationships frayed under the weight of suspicion and rumor. Parents were sometimes told directly or indirectly why their daughter had lost her government job. Siblings pulled away, and the slow dissolution of family connection removed another source of stability. Some of them lost their sense of self after being labeled deviant, perverse, or a security risk by their own government. That damage went deep, touching the places where self-worth lives, and it did not heal on a simple timeline. We do not have most of their stories because they did not tell them. Telling those stories was too costly, so many made the rational calculation that survival required silence. They were often right to be silent, and their stories went with them. This is the particular cruelty of the Lavender Scare. It destroyed lives and made the destruction impossible to speak about. It created victims who could not identify themselves as victims without completing their own destruction. The silence itself became part of what was done to them. The Lavender Scare reached deep into the military, where consequences were in some ways even more severe. Women had served in large numbers during World War II in the WAC, WAVES, and WASP, and had done extraordinary work. After the war, with permanent branches for women, lesbian service members became particularly vulnerable. The military offered careers and advancement, but also intensely policed gender and sexual norms. Military discharges for homosexuality were classified as undesirable and carried devastating secondary consequences. An undesirable discharge affected veterans' benefits, civilian security clearances, and left a permanent record. Thousands of women were discharged under these policies, many after records of exemplary service. The investigations in the military were particularly brutal, with interrogations designed to humiliate and extract information. Women recounted hours-long interrogations that demanded names, dates, and intimate specifics. Some women broke under pressure and named names, and then lived with that for the rest of their lives. Some did not break, and paid the higher immediate price, carrying that burden in a different way. Now, we need to talk about Roy Cohn. The story of the Lavender Scare cannot be told honestly without addressing one of the most spectacular hypocrisies in American political history. Roy Cohn was Senator Joseph McCarthy's chief counsel. He was the man at the right hand of the most powerful anti-communist in America. He ran the Senate investigations, drew up witness lists, conducted interrogations, and maintained the machinery of the Red Scare. He was also one of the people most responsible for extending that machinery to the Lavender Scare. He ensured that gay and lesbian government employees were systematically targeted and purged. Roy Cohn was gay, not suspected of being gay, not arguably gay. Gay. He knew it. The people around him knew it. His biographers with access to extensive testimony and documentation are unanimous on this point. He was a gay man who spent years building and operating a machine designed to destroy the careers of gay and lesbian people in government. The psychological architecture required to do this is not simple to describe. Biographers and historians have analyzed it extensively, and their analyses do not fully resolve it. Was he motivated by pathological self-loathing projecting outward? Was he motivated by the calculation that attacking others was the best protection for himself? Was he motivated by sociopathic indifference to the harm he caused as long as he remained personally safe? Was it some combination of all of these? We cannot know with certainty what Roy Cohn thought about himself in the moments he constructed cases that destroyed other gay people's lives. What we know is what he did. He did it for years. He did it effectively. And he was never, in his lifetime, held accountable for it. Roy Cohn died of AIDS in 1986 at the age of 59. Until the very end, he denied that he was gay and denied that he had AIDS. He insisted, even as the disease was killing him, that he had liver cancer. The man who had spent decades enforcing the closet on others died inside his own. If history has a sense of irony, Roy Cohn is its most devastating example. Roy Cohn had a counterpart in the executive branch, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. Hoover ran the FBI for nearly 50 years, from 1924 to his death in 1972. During that time, he built the Bureau into one of the most powerful institutions in American government. Hoover created an intelligence apparatus with files on nearly every significant public figure, and he used those files to maintain power and pursue vendettas. Hoover's role in the Lavender Scare was central, and the FBI was the primary investigative arm of the Purge. Agents followed suspects, surveilled gathering places, interviewed sources, and maintained the files that enabled the firings. Hoover directed all of this for decades. Hoover lived for most of his adult life with Clyde Tolson, his associate director at the FBI. They were inseparable, dining together almost every day for 40 years and vacationing together. When Hoover died, he left almost his entire estate to Tolson. Whether their relationship was sexual cannot be established with certainty because neither man confirmed it. But historians conclude the nature of their relationship is almost certainly sexual or beyond reasonable doubt. The man who ran the FBI's surveillance of gay and lesbian government employees lived for 40 years with the one person he apparently could not live without. The history of the Lavender Scare is full of this kind of terrible irony. It is full of men who built the machine that hunted people like them. It is tempting to read this as simply individual hypocrisy, but it is also something more structural. Let's talk about scale, because it is easy to talk about the Lavender Scare in terms of its logic and its hypocrisy and its individual stories without fully grasping how enormous it was. Between 1947 and 1961, the State Department alone fired more than 1,000 employees on the grounds of homosexuality. More than 1,000 people in one agency in 14 years. Across the federal government as a whole, the estimates run into the thousands. Some historians estimate that during the peak years of the Purge, the federal government was firing gay and lesbian employees at the rate of roughly 60 per month. 60 people a month, every month, for years. In the military, the numbers are even larger. Between 1947 and 1965, an estimated 1,500 people per year were separated from the military for homosexuality. That's over 27,000 people in 18 years. These are not the statistics of an occasional random phenomenon. These are the statistics of a sustained, deliberate, systematic campaign. And for every person who was formally fired or discharged, there were others who resigned before the investigation could conclude, who got the signal that the investigators were circling, and made the calculation that a voluntary resignation was better than a forced one. Their cases don't appear in the statistics. They also lost their careers. And for every person who lost their career, there were people around them who were touched by the investigation, who were interviewed, surveilled, named in reports, who spent years in the shadow of proximity to someone under investigation, calculating their own risk, managing their own exposure. The Lavender Scare touched an enormous number of lives. Its full scope will probably never be known. One of the practical questions that doesn't get asked enough is what happened to these people after they were fired? Where did they go? How did they survive? The answer varies enormously and depends on factors including race, class, geographic location, and the specific circumstances of the firing. For some, those with independent financial resources, those with professions that had private sector equivalents, those in cities where queer communities were better established and could provide some support. The damage, though severe, was manageable. They rebuilt in different fields, in different cities, in different ways. They survived. For others, those without savings, those in fields where the federal government was the primary employer, those in cities where there was no community to absorb them, the consequences were catastrophic. Poverty, homelessness, the particular destitution of someone who had been carefully building a professional life and had it stripped away without warning or recourse. And for many, the psychological damage was the hardest to quantify and the most lasting. The message sent by a letter of dismissal that was at its core about who you were, not what you had done, but what you were, is not a message that is easily unheard. People who received those letters carried them. Some carried them for the rest of their lives. The suicide rate among people fired during the Lavender Scare has not been systematically studied. The secrecy of the firings makes this kind of retrospective research enormously difficult. But the accounts that exist, the testimony of people who were there, consistently reference the psychological devastation. The specific thing that happens to a person when the institution that is supposed to represent the country they have served turns on them and says, "You are a threat. You are a pervert. You are not welcome here." The trauma was real. The deaths, those that were attributed to it, were real. A city street people moving through it, some with purpose, some drifting. The invisibility of the newly unemployed, the newly destroyed in the flow of ordinary life. Here's what I want you to know about the people who were targeted by the Lavender Scare. Some of them fought back, not many at first. The conditions for fighting back were terrible. The legal system offered almost no help. The political system was actively hostile, and the personal cost was almost incomprehensibly high. But some of them did it anyway. Frank Kameny was an astronomer who worked for the Army Map Service in Washington, D.C. In 1957, he was fired. The FBI had found out through the surveillance apparatus we've been describing that he was gay. He lost his security clearance, he lost his job, he lost the career he had built, and the professional identity he had worked toward. And then he did something that almost nobody had done before him. He fought. Not quietly, not through back channels, not by trying to convince the right people in private. He fought publicly. He challenged his dismissal in the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear his case, as was predictable given the legal climate of the time. But Frank Kameny did not stop there. He became, instead, an activist. One of the founders of the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C., he adopted a confrontational, rights-based approach. Kameny brought to this activism the specific intellectual rigor of a scientist. He was systematic and argumentative in the precise, logical sense of the word. He was not interested in asking for tolerance. He was interested in making the case that the government's policy was wrong. He picketed the White House in 1965 with signs. To understand how extraordinary this was, you have to understand that most gay rights organizations then favored quiet, assimilationist strategies. You dressed conservatively, were polite, tried to demonstrate you were just like everyone else, and asked gently to be treated accordingly. Frank Kameny picketed the White House with signs that said gay people deserved equal rights before Stonewall. He kept fighting for the next 40 years and was central to convincing the American Psychiatric Association to remove homosexuality as a disorder in 1973. He fought the military's ban on gay and lesbian service members and helped organize the movement that would achieve repeal of federal anti-gay employment policies. He lived to see the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011 and died the same year at the age of 86, having fought for over 50 years. You met Barbara Giddings in the Stonewall episode. She belongs here too. Giddings was not just fighting for library books and APA recognition. She was fighting specifically against the Lavender Scare and its architecture. She saw that the system that fired gay government employees and the system that classified homosexuality as a mental illness were the same system. The blackmail argument depended on the stigma. The stigma was maintained by the diagnosis was enforced by the firings, and the firings were justified by the diagnosis. It was a closed loop, and you had to break it somewhere. She chose to break it at the APA by fighting the psychiatric classification. She was right that removing the mental illness label would remove the foundational justification for the government's policy. She worked on this for years, assembling research, arguing, and organizing psychiatrists who were themselves gay and willing to speak publicly. She made the case with patience and intellectual rigor, and the particular persistence of someone who has decided that this. On April 27, 1953, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed Executive Order 10450. This order established the security requirements for federal employment. And in its list of disqualifying conditions, alongside things like communist affiliations and criminal records, it included sexual perversion. With the stroke of a pen, the Lavender Scare was not just practice. It was policy. It was law. Eisenhower is one of those historical figures whose reputation has mellowed considerably with time. He became seen as a grandfatherly moderate Republican who warned against the military-industrial complex and guided America through the early Cold War. The Lavender Scare is rarely mentioned in his biography. It should be. Executive Order 10450 was not signed in ignorance of what it meant. By 1953, the purges had been going on for 6 years. Everyone in Washington knew what sexual perversion meant and how it was being enforced. Eisenhower was not signing an abstract policy with unintended consequences. He was codifying a system that had already destroyed thousands of careers and making clear that it would continue. The order remained in effect for decades. It was the legal basis for the military's ban on gay and lesbian service members. It was the basis for the firing of gay and lesbian civilian federal employees. It was the formal architecture of discrimination signed by a president and never fully dismantled until 1995. In 1995, President Clinton issued an executive order explicitly prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation in civilian federal employment. 42 years. 2 generations of gay and lesbian Americans worked for the federal government in the shadow of that order, or were prevented from working for it because of that order for 42 years. The campaign to change the policies that the Lavender Scare had built into American institutions took decades and the work of thousands of people. The American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its diagnostic manual in 1973, one of the key victories, because it removed the medical basis for the argument that gay and lesbian people were inherently unstable. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978 prohibited discrimination in federal civilian employment based on conduct which does not adversely affect performance, language that provided some protection for gay and lesbian employees, even if not explicit. Executive Order 13087, signed by President Clinton in 1998, explicitly prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation in civilian federal employment. The Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence v. Texas in 2003 struck down the remaining criminal sodomy laws. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011 removed the ban on openly gay service members in the military. The Supreme Court's marriage equality decision in 2015 legalized same-sex marriage nationwide, and threading through all of these were thousands of individual acts of advocacy, organization, litigation, and resistance that made each milestone possible. Frank Kameny and Barbara Giddings and Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon were among countless others whose names history has partially or fully erased. Each victory was built on the previous one. Each was the result of specific people deciding that the policy was wrong and fighting to change it at a time when fighting required courage most people were not prepared to give. We live in the world those people made. Before we end, I want to come back to the women. Not the activists, not the famous names, but the women who were simply trying to work. They had built careers and clearances and professional lives in the most powerful city in the world, and were doing their jobs often brilliantly, when one day they received a letter that changed everything. I want to acknowledge what they carried. Not just the job loss, and not just the financial devastation, though, that was real and catastrophic for many of them. Not just the career destruction, though. That too was real and largely irreversible. What they carried was the specific burden of having been told by the government of their country, through law and policy, that they were not acceptable, that they were threats, and that their existence was a problem that needed to be managed. That is not a message that leaves cleanly. It settles in and becomes part of how you understand yourself, particularly in an era when the cultural environment reinforced the same message from every direction. The church, the mental health establishment, the law, and the government, all said in different registers, but the same key, that you're wrong and you should not exist as you are. The women who survived the Lavender Scare did so with extraordinary dignity, resilience, and even eventually joy against the weight of all of that. The fact that they survived is not a reason not to acknowledge the weight. The weight was real, and the damage was real, and the lives diminished, disrupted, and destroyed were real. The vast majority of those lives, the vast majority of those women are unknown to history. Their names are not in this episode because they are not in any record that is publicly available. They kept their silence because silence was what they needed to survive, and they protected themselves the only way they had. I cannot name them, but I can say that they existed and that they were targeted and that what was done to them was wrong, that they deserved better from the country they served. They deserved better. They existed and they were targeted, and the vast majority of their stories will never be fully told. What do we owe the women of the Lavender Scare? Not just memory, though memory is the beginning. We owe them the knowledge that what happened to them was wrong. Not unfortunate, not the product of a different time with different values that we can shake our heads at from a comfortable distance. Wrong. A systematic, deliberate campaign to destroy the lives of people who had done nothing except be who they were. We owe them the recognition that the rights we have now were not given to us by history's natural progress toward enlightenment. They were fought for. They were won at enormous cost by people who had already paid an enormous cost and decided to pay more. We owe them the understanding that these rights are not permanent, that the same forces that produced the Lavender Scare are not historical relics. They are available to be deployed again. They have been deployed again, in different forms, in different countries, within living memory. The women of the Lavender Scare knew this. They knew it because they lived it. They knew that the rights they didn't have could have been taken away even if they had briefly existed. They knew that nothing was guaranteed. What they could not possibly have known was that what they were living through would not last forever. That the machine they were caught in would eventually be dismantled. That the people fighting back quietly at first, then louder and louder, would eventually win. They did not know that. They fought anyway, or they survived anyway, which sometimes requires just as much courage. The Lavender Scare is one of the least taught episodes in American history. It is not in most high school textbooks. It is not commemorated publicly the way other civil rights violations have come to be commemorated. That needs to change. If this episode showed you something you did not know before, share it. Send it to someone who should know this history. Tell someone the name Fannie Mae Clackham and tell them why that name matters. Tell someone the name Frank Kameny and tell them why that name matters. Tell someone the name Barbara Gittings and tell them why that name matters.